Imagine you are a Soviet soldier. It is 1945. You have survived the worst war in human history. You survived the winter retreats, the German offensives, the hunger, the chaos. You even survived capture, the brutality of a Nazi prisoner of war camp. Now, finally, you are walking home. You see the red flag. You see your own countrymen. You expect a handshake, a hero's welcome, a chance to start living again. Instead, your rank is stripped away, your medals are torn off, and at gunpoint you are marched into a new camp. This time, the guards aren't speaking German, they're speaking Russian. Welcome to the Verification Filtration Camps, the PFL. For nearly 2 million Soviet citizens, soldiers, civilians, former slave laborers, liberation did not mean freedom. It meant moving from a German cage directly into a Soviet one. Why did Stalin imprison his own returning soldiers? To understand the PFL system, we must understand the logic of the Soviet state in 1941. As the Red Army collapsed under the German invasion, Stalin issued Order No. 270, a decree that reshaped military justice. It stated, "Commanders and political workers who tear off their insignia during battle and desert to the rear or surrender to the enemy are to be considered malicious deserters, whose families are subject to arrest as the families of deserters who violated their oath and betrayed their homeland." In the eyes of the Soviet government, there was no such thing as a prisoner of war. There were only martyrs, or traitors. If you were captured, the assumption was simple: you must have done something wrong. Even if you were unconscious, even if you ran out of ammunition, even if your entire unit was wiped out. The cold logic was this: if you were truly loyal, you would have used the last bullet on yourself. But by 1942, reality forced a change. The Red Army began advancing again, and behind the front lines it found hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens who had lived under occupation. Former prisoners of war, escaped prisoners, encircled soldiers, civilians taken to Germany for forced labor. The NKVD faced a terrifying possibility. Some of these people might be German spies, some might be collaborators, and some might simply know too much about life outside Soviet control. So the state built a solution, a vast net to catch them. The Verification Filtration Camps, the PFLs. These were not officially prisons. The inmates were not convicts. On paper, they were the special contingent, a population held in a legal grey zone. Suspects in an investigation with no charges and no time limit. What happened when you arrived? First, separation. Officers to one side, regular soldiers to the other. Then began the filtration, not a physical cleansing, but a bureaucratic interrogation. NKVD officers, and later the feared counterintelligence unit SMERSH, questioned you for hours, sometimes days. Where were you captured? Why didn't you fight to the death? Who did you meet? Who did you speak to? Did you see anyone collaborate? Your story was checked against other prisoners, against old unit rosters, and sometimes against informers planted inside your barracks. One former prisoner later wrote, "I survived the Germans, but here I realized I had to prove that I had not betrayed my own people." Your fate depended on the year. In 1942 and 1943, if you passed the check, you were not sent home. You were sent straight back to the front, often into assault battalions, units deployed to the most dangerous parts of the line to wash away guilt with blood. But if you survived the war, your ordeal was not over. In 1945, the camp population exploded. The war ended in May, but the number of people inside the filtration camps did not fall. It doubled. By the end of 1945, More than 200,000 Soviet citizens were behind barbed wire. Why? Because the Soviet Union lay in ruins, and the NKVD now saw the filtration camps as a perfect source of forced labor. Filtration was deliberately slowed. Cases that should have taken weeks stretched into months, then years. Men cleared of suspicion were still held, because the coal mines of the Donbass, the forests of the north, and the reconstruction projects of the Soviet state needed workers. Even after passing the check, many were not allowed to return home. They were transformed into labor battalions, technically free, but permanently attached to factories, construction sites, and mines. Free in name, but forbidden to leave. There is a common belief that all Soviet prisoners of war were executed or sent to the Gulag. The archives show a more complex story. Only about 15% of people in filtration camps were transferred to the Gulag or punished as collaborators. The vast majority, around 85%, were eventually cleared. But cleared did not mean forgiven. For the rest of their lives, former prisoners of war and repatriated civilians carried a permanent mark of suspicion. On every job application, every housing form, every military document, there was a question. Were you ever in enemy captivity? If you checked yes, your life narrowed. Elite universities were closed to you. Certain cities were off limits. Promotions were impossible. You were a survivor, with a stain the state never washed away. It wasn't until 1995, 50 years after the war, that the Russian government officially recognized the inmates of the filtration camps as victims of political repression. By then, most were gone. The barbed wire had been torn down, the watchtowers dismantled, the barracks turned into storage sheds or left to decay. But for those who lived through the PFL system, the walls never disappeared. They carried the silence, the fear, the shame, knowing that if they spoke openly, the state might once again close its gates on them. For these men, the war did not truly end in 1945. It simply changed shape. It became a quieter war, a private war, fought alone. In the next part of this series, we will follow the story of a man who survived a Nazi extermination camp, led one of history's most daring uprisings, and still returned to a country that viewed him with suspicion. The story of Alexander Pachesky. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel.